All right, I think we'll go ahead and get going. I'll keep an eye on the participant list, see if anybody else hops on, but I'll let you go and get started.
Great. So we're going to go backwards from the agenda that Adam sent out earlier. We're going to first talk about the survey that wrapped up. I guess it's been a couple of weeks now. And then we'll go through the route profiles and discuss the 10 city routes route by route. So on the survey side, what is shown on the screen right now is the survey response rate that we got. So this is a combination both of online survey takers and those that took the paper survey. Column B here shows the responses that we got that referenced any of these routes. And the reason I say it that way is because some people in the survey had feedback on more than one route, or they indicated they ride more than one route. So any mention of a route we counted as a response relative to that route. So what we did is we compared the responses to the average daily ridership for every route. And then we kind of made an assumption that when we look at average daily ridership, that's not really looking at individuals, because most people ride more than once, and we can't make the distinction between one person riding 10 times or 10 people riding one time. So what we did is just kind of a shortcut is we just divided the average daily ridership. This is from April 2021. We divided the average daily ridership by 2 as a starting point, assuming that most people ride outbound and then inbound on a route. So that kind of gave us a sense of how many individuals we think were using the service in April 2021. And that gave us kind of a reference point for the target of the number of responses we were hoping to get in order to achieve a statistical significance for every route. So this number in column I, or these numbers in column I, are the responses that we got for each route relative to the target. And so this column J shows whether we met the target and whether we can say that the response rate is statistically significant at the route level and at the system level. So at the system level, we can say with some confidence that we have a representative sample of the total system ridership in our survey responses. At the route level, unfortunately, we can't say the same for every route. So far, 2 routes, Route 10 and Route 27, have crossed the threshold to be statistically significant. The challenge and maybe the paradox is the smaller the ridership on a route is, the higher percentage of that number we need back in order to say we have statistical significance. Because when you have a very large sample size, you can get us a small portion of that very large number and it's still statistically significant. But when you have a small number like 24 people riding Route 34 in April 2021, to get a statistical significance sample, we needed 23 responses. And so we weren't, we didn't cross the threshold. So I guess that's where we are in terms of the response rate. We kind of did a little bit of brainstorming on what next with Adam and Margaret and a few other folks. So at this point, I don't know if Adam, you and Margaret, if you have any thoughts. Have you gotten any additional surveys? Do you think you may get any additional surveys? And if not, then are we satisfied with a total system representation versus a route by route representation? Or do we need to take additional steps? So that's kind of the discussion item.
So I do think we're close on a lot of these. I think it'd be worth going back out and trying to target some surveys to see if we can get statistical significance at the route level on a lot of these that we're very close on. I think it's my understanding we still have some outreach capacity with Shaki, who's on the team. So
we do, yeah.
I think it's worth exploring that to try to get. I mean, it is heartening that we're there at the system level, but I don't think there's enough at the route level, especially on a lot of these. We're within a very reasonable striking distance, it seems like.
Right. Of course, the challenge is the university services where we don't have just a ridership pool at, right now in the summer. So I don't know if, Margaret, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, my feeling is that overall, we're not going to get more people doing this survey. And I think I would rather focus on the next survey for KU, because at this point, I won't have students who have ridden these routes until late August. And it seems like an unnecessary delay when it comes to the university related routes. If we hit the number on city routes, I think that would be much more important overall. And we'll have an opportunity to get students to weigh in on changes as we move forward with the next steps of this study.
Okay, I like that approach. We will have another survey after we come up with scenarios. But yeah, so any other thoughts?
That makes sense to me.
Okay. All right. So we'll focus on trying to boost the numbers a little bit on the city routes, and then move on from there. Okay. So then the next item that I want to talk about is the route profiles. So the way we're going to discuss these tonight is we're going to go through route by route. And I have on my screen a slightly different way to visualize the information that's in the route profiles. This is a Google Earth platform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show route by route and discuss what each route is doing, the strengths and the weaknesses we identified. And as we discuss these, we can zoom into any route. We can look at it at street level. If anyone has any questions about, for example, ridership generators or lack of ridership, we can look at it from all kinds of different angles, all kinds of different directions. So we'll start with Route 1, and we'll talk about that first. And then if all goes well, we can make our way through each of the routes. So starting with Route 1, the strengths that we identified on Route 1 is that it does provide this important link from downtown Lawrence down to the southeastern part of the city, where you have the shelter as well as Douglas County Jail. So that is an important connection to make. It has relatively high service frequency. So this route is operating every 30 minutes currently. It's a fairly direct route, so yes, it makes a number of steps, but it's not backtracking in any way, so it's a fairly direct route. It serves several areas of higher density. So on the screen, the color coding that you see on the screen is density. So we talked about that in the past, but yellow areas are the areas that have kind of that minimum density to support fixed route service, and then red and orange have even higher density. So it does serve also areas that have the types of land use that we would like to see along a transit route. So multifamily housing, the icons that you see on the screen here, the little houses are multifamily housing, the crosses are medical facilities, you have shopping, retail areas, educational facilities with these little graduation caps, and then the blue icons are community centers of various kinds. So lastly, the route does have fairly strong on-time performance. So these are all strengths. Some of the weaknesses that we identified for this particular route, the route generates fewer than 5 passengers per trip on most trips on weekdays and Saturdays, so fairly low ridership. It also has no Sunday service, and then no direct access to full service grocery stores. So that's kind of an important one, because ideally every route in the system is a strong standalone route. And then when you put those strong standalone routes together, they make for an even stronger network. But to be a strong standalone route, it has to have a good mix of origins and destinations, a good mix of kind of anchors to sustain the route. And currently, there aren't any supermarkets or like full service grocery stores that are on the route. The closest one is the Dillon's food store on Massachusetts, but none directly on the route that would allow people to have what's called a one-seat ride to a grocery store. So that's a weakness. So the opportunities that we identified for the route potentially is to reduce the frequency during lower demand time periods. So as I mentioned, this is a 30-minute service throughout the service day right now. Reducing frequency could look like operating with 30 minutes during peak periods, hourly off-peak. So that's a possibility. Also modifying the route to link the areas of high density housing. So for example, along Haskell, we do see a lot of multifamily housing that either is apartment communities. There's, I think it's Douglas County, or is it Lawrence? Yeah, Douglas County Housing Authority. We have several mobile home parks along this route as well. Over here is one of the bigger ones. That's the Riverside Mobile Home Park. So you have this good concentration of multifamily housing, but there isn't, as I said, a link to groceries. So if we can find a way to do that, maybe rerouting to Massachusetts, or maybe through interlining. So interlining is where a route, once it gets to the end of the line, it changes its head sign and continues on another route. So people don't have to change vehicles. That allows for people who are going to, for example, grocery shopping, to have that one-seat ride opportunity. So interlining would mean linking this route to some other route. And then another opportunity that we identified was to replace weekend service with demand response service. Weekend service is particularly light on this route. Very few trips generate even 4 riders per trip. The average is 3.2. So that's kind of the level that could be served instead by demand response service. So I'll pause there. We've gone through one route, and I want to see if people have any thoughts or any additional ideas for opportunities.
Hey, Boris, this is Quiz. You mentioned, and maybe you can point that out on the map, could this route with a different alteration stop at the Dillon's on Mass?
Sure. So it is a possibility. Of course, anytime you change something, somebody's going to be impacted. So here, the good thing about operating on Haskell is that you're in close proximity to quite a few, to a high density of multifamily residential. So that's good. The bad part is that you don't have groceries. So if you were to link to Massachusetts, for example, these folks would have to then be connected by some other route, which is not, I don't want to say that's not possible. It certainly is. It's just kind of the domino effect. But one idea is to operate this route as it is through 19th Street, but then continue to Massachusetts on the way up to downtown. So that's one possibility. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
My question was just kind of off of that grocery store access question. This is Laura McCulloch. I was wondering how that decision would be made. Would that be presented to the public as a couple options? Like if there were some sort of an option for a route to bring that route in closer to the grocery store versus, as you mentioned, or as having it switch at the top of the destination so that they remain on the bus and continued on to another route, that sort of thing. How would those decisions be made?
Right. So our next step after these route profiles is to start putting together service scenarios. And the service scenarios will be, there will be 2 scenarios, and they'll be very different from one another, but they'll both try to meet the same kind of set of guiding principles. And so the guiding principles are things like service should be simple. Each route should serve a strong market. It should have a good mix of origins and destinations. So even though the aim will be the same on the scenarios, they'll be very different in the way that the networks look. So one may have a reroute of this route. The other one may have an inner line of this route.
This is August, so I just have a question. Maybe I'm not understanding. Is the 15 gonna go down Barker, or is there no route going down Barker Avenue? Because 1908 East 19th, 1600 Haskell Avenue, plus all the Prairie Park neighborhood depend on a line going down Barker to get to the Dillonstone, Mass.
Sure. Yeah. So at this point, there's nothing that has been determined at all. So there's, the 15 could be part of the solution here, but it's not the only option. Let's see, Barker, I believe, is right here. Yeah. So this is Barker right here. So there certainly could be. And we'll talk about the 15, some ideas for the 15 as we go through this, but that is certainly an idea that could be part of the solution.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good, glad August brought that up, because I also did the same thing where I was kind of just looking at 1 and 15 and how they kind of traverse the same areas, do a couple different things. They branch in different ways at the end of the route, one going towards the shelter and jail, the other going towards Venture Park and the employees up there. So I think it's worth exploration of how routes travel in this direction and where they end up, and and is it, do these get pieced together in some other way, to still serve? Sure.
Yeah, and Barker, we will talk about Barker a bit later, but one of the other layers that we have at our disposal here is a ridership layer. So on this one is color coded a little bit differently than in the route profiles where we had the pie charts. This one is just looking at boardings. So the red, obviously the red is the higher boarding areas, the yellow and orange are lower. So, Barker hasn't been a strong corridor, at least historically, but that's something that we can look at as well. So, all right, let's turn that off and let's look at the next route. Okay, next we'll look at Route 3.
Hey, Boris, just before we get too deep into all of this, I know we used the word interlining a couple of times. Is the entire group familiar with what that means? Did we talk about what interlining was?
Right. So interlining is kind of what I just tried to describe previously, where a route may end once it gets its endpoint, it may continue on another route, and it'll change its head sign, but the same vehicle or group of vehicles will operate along more than one route. There's a lot of benefits for interlining. One of those benefits is that you can play around a little bit more with the schedules. So for example, on Route 1, which we looked at, we had the thought about maybe we can operate hourly versus every 30 minutes. So Route 1 right now, if I'm not mistaken, requires the travel time for Route 1. If the travel time for Route 1 is too short, or any route for that matter is too short, it's hard to operate at hourly service frequency without having a lot of sitting around time. In other words, the vehicle will get to the end of the line. Maybe it takes it 40 minutes to do a round trip. If it takes 40 minutes to do a round trip, you can't really operate that service hourly without also having a 20-minute break to make up the difference. And so interlining can kind of eat up some of the excess layover time. So for example, if you have one route that has very poor on-time performance because its schedule is very tight, another route that has excess layover time, you can link those together and you can have the entire circuit having a good amount of layover time among the two routes, rather than pushing all the layover to one route and then not giving the other route enough layover time. It's a lot easier to explain in a spreadsheet, but hopefully that makes sense to some folks. And then the other benefit, of course, is that interlining does provide for a one-seat ride. So people don't have to get off the bus, even if they're transferring to another route.
Yeah, thank you for walking through that. And Laura makes a good comment in chat about that's a potential way to connect this to a grocery store. And I think just for the sake of discussion, while you already have Route 3 up, could you turn back on Route 1 as well?
Yep.
I don't know that this necessarily makes sense, but this is a good example of like if these were interlined, I know in Route 1, we have quite a bit of layover time. We're able to complete that quicker and tend to have a decent amount of layover at the library. And I know Route 3 is quite tight. So for the sake of kind of where we're at right now, this could be an interesting, if that northbound Route 1 just continued as Route 3 and then came back and that's went south into Route 1, that would be a way that interlining could happen.
Exactly. And then so that kind of leads to the question of why not just call these a single route? Why not just call the whole thing Route 1? And the argument against calling it all Route 1 is if you have a major ridership turnover point like downtown, it can create confusion. If you have a route called Route 1 that goes north and a route called Route 1 that goes south, they're very different markets, and you don't want a person to accidentally get on the wrong bus. If they're trying to go south, you don't want them to get on a bus heading north just because it had a 1 on it. So even if these routes are operated by the same vehicle, it makes sense to still change the head sign to make sure the new folks getting on downtown get on the right bus. All right. So let's talk about Route 3. Okay, so Route 3, some of the strengths of Route 3 is that it provides an important link to the Lawrence Memorial Hospital campus, which is right here. It's a relatively frequent service at 30-minute service all day. It serves several large employment centers, distribution centers, logistics hubs, whatever you want to call them, up in the north part of the city. It also has, it does serve some areas of high density residential, especially along Michigan Street, where again, you have a mix of apartment communities and mobile home parks. And it is a strong route in terms of on-time performance. Some of the weaknesses of the route are that it, like Route 1, it has fewer than 5 passengers per trip on most trips. The average is 2.8 on weekdays and 2.4 on Saturdays. It has low ridership north of 2nd Avenue. I'm going to just turn the ridership on real quick so we can see that clearly. Okay, so you'll see the ridership sort of wanes once you get past the hospital area. Another weakness is that it has this fairly long segment of one-way service. So buses go northbound on Michigan Street, but then come back south on Iowa Street. So the effect of that is that a person who gets on the bus at some of these apartments along Michigan Street, they have to ride out of direction. If they're trying to go downtown, they have to ride northbound before they can finally start heading southbound. And for a lot of
opposite course.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. Okay, so they go northbound in Iowa. Okay, so that means that if they're going home from downtown, they either have to get off before the bus heads north on Iowa, and then they have to walk, or they ride out of direction and then back to get home. But nevertheless, that one-way service tends to be a barrier for a lot of folks who have a choice. Choice riders, you may have heard the term before. If they have a choice, they may not consider this a viable option. And then another issue here is no direct access to a supermarket again. So those are things we'd want to address. So the opportunities here are, first of all, to reduce off-peak frequency to improve productivity. So again, doing a 30/60 versus a 30 all day. Truncating the route at Lawrence Memorial Hospital, which is here where the ridership is highest, truncating the route here to improve productivity, potentially replacing the northern portion of the route with a demand response service if you do truncate the fixed route there. Also operating the service along one of these 2 alignments rather than splitting the difference. You may lose some ridership, but you probably would gain ridership on the segment that has the consistent inbound and outbound alignment. And then also modifying the route to link the residential with a grocery store. There's a few different options how that could be done, but that's something that should be considered. And then replacing weekend service with demand response service, because again, weekend ridership is fairly low at 2.4 passengers per trip on average. Any thoughts on this one?
This is
Or-
August Buddha. So may I ask a question? Are you attempting to achieve grocery store access on every route? And I'm just curious because I don't know. Are you, because you've mentioned it a couple times. Because when I think of the 3 route, the reason why I ask is when I think of 3, I think of Berry Plastics and nothing else. Well, the hospital and Berry Plastics and 101 North Michigan and 250 North Michigan, stuff like that.
Right. So I don't want to say blanket, yes, we want to have it on every, we want to have a grocery store on every route, but we want every route to have a good mix of origins and destinations, to have the opportunity to be very strong on its own, even without forcing people to transfer. So to be a strong route, people have to be able to sort of build their lives around that route and be able to accomplish a lot of the kind of basic tasks that you do day in and day out along that route without being forced to transfer to do something as simple as going to a grocery store. So maybe some routes wouldn't have a grocery store. Maybe they'd have a pharmacy or something else. But to the extent possible, we want to link to somewhere where people can get groceries. Maybe it's a Walmart, maybe it's an actual grocery store, but something like that.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
Yeah, and that goes for the city routes. I think it's a bit of a different story for the university service, because those are kind of a different animal. Those are what we call site-specific shuttles. They're designed to meet the mobility needs that are very specific to the site that they serve. But for the general purpose citywide routes, we would want every route to be a strong standalone route. Okay.
Boris, this is Quiz. When you mentioned this route possibly being, on demand on Saturdays because of 2.4, I thought you said during the weekdays it was 2.6, and I'm just curious, what is your cutoff for what would be considered possible on demand and not? Because 2.4 and 2.6 sound pretty close to me, but
yeah, it was actually 2.8, which isn't that much better, but still, you're right. Well, let me back up by saying that the opportunities that we identify in the profiles are really a brain dump. I mean, they're not meant to, some of them are contradictory by nature because there's usually more than one way to fix a poorly performing route. One way could be to kill the route altogether and to replace it with microtransit or demand response or something else. Another way would be to invest more resources into that route to operate more frequently and try to appeal to more riders. So, and then also some of the opportunities could be combined. So for example, if you had a demand response service north of Second Street, then you could have potentially more frequent service on this southern portion of the route that is still going to be fixed route service. So you could combine fixed route service with a demand response option north of Second Street, but that fixed route service is probably still going to be strongest during weekdays. So potentially on weekends, the entire route could be replaced by demand response service, whereas on weekdays, just the northern tier of it. So those, that's kind of how these ideas could be taken, as a group or individually or some combination of that.
okay, thank you.
What can you speak to the utilization of the stops along Iowa?
Sure. So this is the Hallmark facility, right here. So we can actually click and see what the ridership was. This was from 2019. I forgot the month. Maybe somebody remembers what month.
Actually, Boris, where you just had your mouse is the hospital.
Oh, let's see.
You're great spot for Hallmark.
Yeah, I might be experiencing a delay. I apologize.
Yeah, well, the hospital has fairly high ridership. So, but with this, I think it does sometimes lag. So that could happen. What we see here is that there were 4.8 boardings and 9.6 alightings during the month that this ridership data represents. So it's not, super high ridership as compared to this stop, for example, where we have so 11 boardings, 14 alightings at the hospital. So that's we can look at other stops if you're interested along Iowa Street.
Yeah. Well, I bring this up in part because I can't recall if there's a year of construction, if it's next year, but the Lawrence Loop Trail is going to connect Peterson behind Hallmark over to Michigan.
Okay.
which provides pretty nice pedestrian access.
That's true, but they don't plan to actually close the roads when they do that because it's fairly minimal.
Well, I guess,
I live
yeah,
Wood
I
Creek,
guess-
and so I looked at the
yeah, I certainly wasn't anticipating any road closure. Just thinking along the lines of if they're, if given the discussion about how, given the variability in the route, how some people have to double back. If,
Sure.
a singular route was chosen along Michigan, at least there will be an option, a year out to provide much more direct pedestrian access from also the north part of a more northerly spot on Michigan over to Iowa as well, which I don't know how much that factors in decision making, but
No, it's really good to know. So yeah, that's
That's a
really
really
good to know.
good point. Did we give them a layer about that, Adam, with the loop information?
We did not provide, that project information for this yet. That's a good point. I'm glad Chris brought it up.
yeah, it's a KDOT funded project. There'll actually be an underpass under McDonald Road over to Michigan. So it provides also a somewhat safer pedestrian environment than like Second and having to cross McDonald Drive. And so
Yeah, that's
I think thinking about how that factors into this decision is probably helpful.
sure. That's a great piece of information.
Boris, this is Gary Weber. Boris, I've had a number of people complain to me about the non-alignment of one-way sections like this. And when I look at your route report for this, I see the northbound and southbound, and I'm trying to think if you routed the bus on one of these two options, which way it would be. Is there any piece of data that would tell us? When I look at the two maps for northbound and southbound on the route studies, it seems to me that the Michigan Street has a small, the circles relate to size, our number of alightings and embarkings. So it seems that they're significantly more alightings and parkings on the North Iowa segment of this loop than there are on the Michigan segment. Is that correct?
It appears that's the case. So this stop, for example, 2.3 boardings, 4 lightings, and there was less than 1 on average here versus this one that has 4.8 and 9.6. But I do think that trail is, that's a bit of a game changer because we're not seeing a whole lot of ridership along Michigan Street now for whatever reason, but I think it's hard to judge those people for not riding because the service is inconvenient. So if the service did operate along the consistent alignment coming and going, I think there's a lot of ridership potential here. Obviously, Hallmark is a big employer, so there's a case to be made for them too. It's just a matter of who do we force to walk along that trail, and I don't have an answer for that. We could have, again, in the scenarios that we develop, we could have one scenario where there's service along Michigan and another where there's service along Iowa, and then see what the public says.
And to Boris's point about ridership potential, this August, North Michigan has 2 trailer parks, a apartment complex, not in the Sandra Shea park. So there are quite a few people who are low income or houseless and rely on public transit. 2019 may not represent that because it wasn't a factor per se, but I think North Michigan does have quite a large rider potential.
Okay. All right. We will move on. Also, Adam, I don't see I think we had this issue last time. I don't see the chat box very easily. So if there's anybody that put something in chat, please let me know.
Yep, I'm keeping my eye on it.
Okay. Let's do Route 4 next. Okay. I'm going to turn off the ridership so you can see it better. So Route 4, the strength, well, really one of the main strengths about this route is that it does provide this key connection to North Lawrence. It's the only, or to this part of North Lawrence. It's the only route that is traveling up here to Locust Street and Lyon and 7th Street and the DMV up here. So that's a pretty important connection. It has hourly service frequency, which we described it as easy to remember clock face frequency. I don't know if everybody knows the term clock face frequency or not. It's kind of one of those terms like interlining that we use a lot in transit, but normal people may not know. But clock face essentially means that if the schedule goes into 60 evenly, then you can have a very recurring, repetitive schedule. So the bus will, if the bus can arrive at the top of the hour every hour, or 30 past the hour at the top of the hour, 30 past the hour every hour. So 15-minute frequency, 20-minute frequency, 30-minute frequency, 60-minute frequency, all those are called clock face frequencies because they happen at the same time every hour, as opposed to a 40-minute service frequency, which will jump around the clock. So 1 hour, it may be 20 after, the other hour, the next hour, maybe 40 after. So it's sort of jumping around the clock. Okay, so it does have clock face frequency, even though it's a bit infrequent at hourly service. It provides weekday and Saturday service, which is good, and then it has strong on-time performance. The weaknesses are, again, low ridership. The average is 4.1 passengers per trip on weekdays, 2.7 on Saturdays. It has a somewhat circuitous alignment through North Lawrence. So Locust Street to 7th to Lyon, that's, if somebody's going to the DMV, for example, that is a bit of a, deviation for them. However, there are railroad tracks here that offer few crossing opportunities. There are some, but not a lot. So that's something to consider. There's no Sunday service. And then again, no direct service to a supermarket unless the Merck Co-op is considered a full service supermarket. And I'm not sure in your community how that's viewed, if it is considered or not a full service supermarket.
I would say, this is Gary Weber, I would say that the Merck Co-op is considered in our community a full service supermarket.
Okay. Is it, are there any issues with kind of pricing? I know that sometimes those kind of, no, there aren't. Okay.
No,
So,
they make a strong effort to keep the pricing competitive with full-size supermarkets.
okay, great. So in that case, the opportunities that could be considered here are realigning the route. Well, that was the grocery idea, so I'll just skip that for now. Replace the route with demand response service to improve coverage and productivity. So let's look at the ridership here. So it's more, in this case, in the case of North Lawrence, it's as much a coverage issue as a productivity issue, because there are some stops that do generate fairly reasonably high ridership. So this stop has 15 boardings and 12 and a half lightings on average a day. But this area overall, probably could be served by a demand response service that could provide better coverage. If there was demand response service in this area, the fixed route could be streamlined. So you could kind of have both potentially. You could have the fixed route service along 2nd Avenue, but then also broader coverage with demand response as a possibility. Another idea is to shift the service from Lyon Street to North Street to provide better access to the Riverside Mobile Home Park. So that's this here. This is the Riverside Mobile Home Park. If buses came up 7th to North Road, they would have closer access to these folks. Any thoughts on any of those opportunities?
Boris, this is Quiz. If you offered a straight line service to the far north portion of that and did demand, in the Lyons area, if you offered straight line service, how much time would be saved on that route by taking off the Lyons piece? And then could you add that somewhere else on another part of the route to kind of keep it in a same time frequency?
Sure. Yeah, you definitely could. Any time savings on a route, that may be 5 or 8 minutes that you could save on that route. You could apply, potentially to extend the route further on 9th Street, or potentially, because 9th Street itself does have a number of apartment communities. There's a number of places where you could reinvest the resources. You could also, again, potentially interline the route. And sometimes interlining doesn't work because the schedules of the two routes don't align very well. Either there's just not enough time available to interline, or the routes are on different schedules. Like you can't interline one route that's every 30 minutes with another that's every 40 minutes. They have to be on the same schedule. So saving time anywhere could be reinvested, I guess you could say, somewhere else.
Hey, this is August Buddha. So I do definitely like the 420 North Street route because that is another low-income trailer park. I don't understand the redundancy of Lion Street. I think either northbound or southbound coming straight down North 3rd would make sense. But at least having one route come up Lion to North Street and then one route just straight down North 3rd makes sense to me.
So let me ask you about that. If you had service on 3rd, then is 3rd Street, North 3rd close enough to this mobile home park? Where you would?
Yeah, I mean, 420 North Street is less than half a mile from North 3rd Street. And it's at that Wood Oil and the O'Reilly's, I think, is right there. So you could, I guess that they could catch it there. But there's also Lake Street that north, if it came up Lion, or if it came up 7th Street, I think it does right now, and hit North Street, it would also hit Lake Street and Laura Street, I think, which is also LDCHA housing.
Okay. Is that over here? So this is Lake Street?
Yeah. Yeah, at 7th and North Street, I think, is LDCHA housing.
Okay. Got it.
But that's just my thoughts.
Okay.
I guess a quick question for Adam, and I don't know, or maybe even Jessica, historically, have we ever had any requests out in that area to change this route to service other areas out in there?
I guess what I can think of, I know there's been discussions about just increased access to the DMV. It already goes there, but maybe it's more frequency, folks who are trying to travel like through the court system and need to go to the DMV for those reasons. I don't think I've heard anything else just kind of general coverage, like we'd like to see it on the street or moving it somewhere else. I haven't heard too much of that. I'm very intrigued though by August's his insight on some of the things going on over there. I'll have to look at 3rd Street, just thinking about the utility of that versus 2nd.
Yeah, I'm curious what it looks like.
It would need significant improvements on the railroad crossing for a bus to cross the railroad on 3rd. That crossing is in terrible shape compared to 7th.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I believe, doesn't it cross the tracks twice, in fact? Or no, there's just, oh yeah, there are, it looks like there's maybe active tracks and not active tracks.
There's just a number of railroad tracks right there, but they're all together, so you cross them all at the same time.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. This is Gary Weber. Those two that you see in the foreground of that image serve the grain elevator, and they're almost never used. But the ones that are forward there, where the signalized crossing are like Margreta said, they're in abysmal shape, and they are even more prone to having trains parked on them than the 7th Street crossing is. So there would be some issues with 3rd Street crossing. You'd have more chance of a train stopped on that than you would at the 7th Street crossing.
Okay, yeah, that's good insight too, because it's devil's always in the details. So if there are long trains that stop here on a regular basis, then that could cause all kinds of problems for on-time performance.
Most go through, but occasionally there is a stop.
And
In
then what
fact,
about
I've used 7 when I've used this 4 when the bus was actually blocked at the 7th Street crossing and had to wait about 15 to 20 minutes. I don't think it happens very often. I also want to say I would support the movement to North Street rather than where it is currently now.
and the 2nd Street bridge or underpass, is it sufficiently tall for buses? Is that
Yes,
okay?
semis drive under there regularly.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay.
My thought about North Street from driving there is that that would definitely lend itself to August's suggestion of making it go one direction through the neighborhood and the other direction on 3rd, because I don't think we would want our bus to have to make the left turn without a signal at North Street off of North 2nd. That would be a terrible thing to have to do every 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I would be hesitant in general to get into the habit of having different alignments in the north and southbound direction, because I think we're trying to address those and move away from those. So I wouldn't want to introduce new versions of that.
Yeah.
I think if we stayed on 7th and we came to North Street versus Lion Street, I think that could work. Or if there is,
well, the difference is that North has no light and Lion does, and I believe that's why the bus goes down Lion, is because it has a signal.
oh, I see. Okay, so a left turn from 2nd to North would be challenging.
In a car, it sucks. It might be easier in a bus, but the traffic is generally going a lot faster than 45 miles an hour. And this is me speaking as somebody who's lived in North Florence, not me speaking as somebody running KU buses.
Yeah, so we would never recommend a turn from a smaller street, a left turn from a smaller street onto a larger street. We would never do that. But occasionally, from a larger street to a smaller street is less problematic, because it's something that you can yield to traffic. You may not have to come to a complete stop even as you're making that turn. It's not ideal, but it's something that we're more comfortable recommending than this kind of movement. So. All right, let's move on to Route 5.
One quick thing, Boris, Gary Weber again. If you went with a North 2nd Street alignment and skipped the digression through the neighborhood, if you just went up North 2nd and down North 2nd, how would a client use that on-demand service to get home? If, say, they got out at one of the stops that would be along 2nd Street, how would they manage to get an on-demand ride from there to their home in North Lawrence?
Right. So typically the way that it would work is whenever you implement a demand response service, and the more modern version of that is called microtransit service. When you do that, it has to have a strong anchor where people can make transfers to other types of services. In the case of North Lawrence, I would probably recommend that anchor be at the downtown hub. It's fairly close. So a person that makes their way downtown and they live in any of the neighborhoods up here in North Lawrence, they would be able to just bypass the fixed route service altogether and just use the microtransit option. Now that microtransit zone may not extend to the DMV, for example, because we don't want to cannibalize the potential ridership of a fixed route. So if there was fixed route service along 2nd Street, it would probably serve the DMV, whereas the neighborhood would be served by a demand response service.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Route 5. Okay, so Route 5, the strengths that we identified were that it provides crosstown service between the East Hills Business Park and the Iowa Street corridor. We have a whole lot of retail You have a lot of stuff actually in that corridor. It's a very, very destination rich corridor, but it at the southern end, it's sort of anchored with a lot of retail. It provides a very direct alignment with few deviations. The only notable deviation is to Haskell, to the university there. Easy to remember clock face frequency. Regarding Haskell, it does connect the campus to retail and grocery destinations. So, people that may be living on campus have access to retail and grocery destinations. It offers weekday and Saturday service, and it has strong on-time performance. The weaknesses are that it has low ridership, much lower ridership than we would expect given the land use and the density along this route. So there's some question about why that is. This is kind of an aside, but I suspect maybe it's because even though at 30,000 feet, it looks like it has great land use along the path. In reality, some of the apartment communities, for example, are off of 23rd Street. So there's a bit of a distance to cover to get to the service corridor. And then 23rd Street itself is a fairly big street that's doesn't make for a great pedestrian environment. So so even though you have a whole lot of multifamily housing, there may be some maybe it's a little bit intimidating for people to catch buses along 23rd Street from these neighborhoods. That's my thought, but I'd be glad to hear your thoughts as well. The other weaknesses are that this service isn't anchored at any of the major hubs of the system. So it's not anchored at either KU or downtown. So because of that, transfer opportunities are a little bit of an unknown, I think, for riders, because if a person gets downtown or to KU, they kind of know the environment in which they're waiting for a transfer, and they also know that schedules are there's an attempt to coordinate schedules more so than at a random intersection along 23rd Street. So that's an issue as well. And then there is some redundancy on this route with other routes like the 7 and the 15. So the 7 is here. So you see that the 7 does kind of, at least between 23rd Street and the southern part of Iowa, there's a little bit of redundancy. And then the 15 provides also some redundancy from the business park, from the office park. They follow the same alignment. So some opportunities for this route. First of all, you could potentially split the route into two routes. There's a few different ways you could do that, but one option would be to kind of link the office park with the Haskell campus, and then from the Haskell campus head up to downtown. So that could be one route. So that links Haskell to downtown. Another, if you split it there, the remainder of the route maybe could serve the southern part of Iowa, maybe also serving Haskell, and then maybe ending up at KU to provide the connection between KU and Haskell, but then also preserving the access for Haskell students to retail. So that's one possibility of splitting the route. There are other possibilities. I think Adam, you came up with another idea. I think you said service along Clinton Parkway, and maybe you.
Yeah, this route to me highlights a couple of major corridors that we don't have consistent service throughout town on. So, could this route still go out to the business park, but also serve the other, as 23rd Street turns into Clinton Parkway, could serve that entire corridor, so you can take a one ride seat east to west across town. Mm-hmm. Or similar to that, the north-south segment, down Iowa to the South Iowa retail, we don't have a route that serves from there all the way to 6th Street along the Iowa Street corridor. And the Iowa Street corridor and the 23rd Clinton corridor are two major travel corridors in our city, and it would be, I think, good for us to consider if buses can also travel those rational kind of corridor movements. Mm-hmm. The Iowa one is a little easier to imagine that connecting with the future hub at Bob Billings in Iowa. The 23rd Street in Clinton is a little more tricky. You'd have to decide if it just, so it would have the same issues as you described now. If it didn't connect to a hub, it would be kind of this route you'd have to figure out where transfers can comfortably happen. Or you could commit to, as it travels east and as it travels west, it could dive up to Bob Billings to connect with the hub, and then come right back out to 23rd and continue on. It'd be not a pretty deviation, but it would be a way to keep you in one seat, east to west.
Right. Yeah. My concern with the Clinton Parkway 23rd Street corridor is that we actually looked at the travel demand, what the regional travel demand model is showing as far as where people that are going to the office park are coming to and from. I'll show that here. So interestingly enough, the office park and the South Iowa street corridor, those are linked in terms of overall travel patterns in the region. But for some reason, people are choosing not to do that by transit, or they don't feel comfortable making that connection by transit. And I wonder if it's just the 23rd Street corridor itself that is just so challenging for pedestrians. Maybe that's it, because there clearly is a travel demand for other modes. So.
The other thing I'll mention about the 23rd Street corridor, from the Haskell Bridge eastbound all the way to O'Connell, is getting rebuilt soon to be much more pedestrian friendly. 23rd Street used to be, well, it's still labeled on this map as K10. The K10 designation actually shifted to this South Iowa, the South Lawrence Traffic Way. Okay. So 23rd Street in that section is no longer K10.
Okay.
So it will be transitioning the eastern part of it to be a little more landscaped and friendly and shared use paths, and feel a little more buffered for pedestrian walking. So I don't know how much that changes things for us, but it is something on the horizon.
This is August Ruda. So I thought Route 29 was going to alleviate the Route 5 going to the Hainu part. Was that was a change that made 2 years ago, or was I dreaming?
You mean 27?
27, yeah. I knew it was one of the 20s.
So we will talk about 27, and you're right. So it does, Route 27 does connect the two campuses, KU and Hainu. Is that how you guys say it? Hainu?
Hinu?
Yeah, I have no idea. I just guessed.
I'm going to call it Haskell. So yeah, so 27 does do that, and we will talk about 27 in a minute. But you're correct that it does also serve the campus, or both campuses.
Okay. This is Gary Weber. Real quickly, this is an interesting route because one end is an employment destination and the other is a retail destination. So as I look at your boardings and our lightings, people don't seem to be getting on in South Iowa and going to the business park, but a lot of people are going to the business park. Those are people picking it up on the way to go to work, and then they get off on it and stop, but they don't go to South Iowa when they get off work at 5:30. So this seems like a little interesting alignment because it doesn't really get people to work efficiently or home from work if work destination is the East Hill Business Park. Do you see what I mean?
I do. I agree completely, because on paper, both of these are very strong destinations, but there's something about the way that this is linked that isn't really resonating with people.
Well, I think they go to South Iowa to shop in the evening and on weekends, and they go to work on the weekday, morning and evening. So they're two different sets of trips. People don't generally come from work and go to South Iowa. They go home to get dinner.
Right.
Hey, just real quick, this is Quiz. What is is this 30-minute headway on this route?
This is currently 30-minute headway.
Okay. I was going to ask a question on any of our routes. Boris, is there an ideal, like, maximum limit that folks should be traveling on a bus for them to then say, if it was over 30 minutes and it was 40-minute headway, that's too much for them. They're going to take a different mode of transit, so what is your recommended, like, the max that somebody should be on a bus?
Oh, okay. So there's two kind of numbers, two metrics that we need to keep in our mind. One is headways, which is also called frequency. So that's how often the bus will come to a given stop. The other one is travel time. So travel time is how long a person is on the bus from start to finish of their trip. We want to keep both of those as low as possible if we want to increase ridership as much as possible. But there's always a push and pull because, for example, if you streamline a route and you make it that reduces the amount of time a person's on a bus because the bus can travel as directly as possible. But then you can miss out on some key ridership destinations along the way if you don't deviate into some neighborhoods and so on. So there's always finding that right balance. When you have a deviation, which does result in a longer travel time, it should be very justified. So in this case, Haskell is a deviation from the more direct path. And I would argue that probably a college or university is a justifiable deviation from the most direct path. So I'm not sure there's a silver single number that I can tell you that people shouldn't be on the bus for more than 20 or 30 minutes, because it really is something that needs to be considered in comparison to other modes. So for example, if your option is driving and it takes you 10 minutes to drive from point A to point B, and then it takes you an hour and a half to take the bus, that's not a very compelling argument for someone. On the other hand, if it's a 30-minute trip by car, a 20-minute trip by bus, that can be competitive. So.
This is August Rudiso, and it really just depends on destination and our starting point. From my house to North Lawrence, it's a 45-minute bus ride. But when I worked in East Hills Business Park, because it is a direct route, it's a 10-minute bus ride. So it just depends on where you're starting from and where you're going. But
right.
I tell people, plan on 45 minutes.
Right. Okay.
Highlight, I saw, Carol and Chris made a couple comments in the chat related to 23rd Street just is very auto-oriented, especially that east side. The businesses there, it's quite an auto-oriented place, even with some of the pedestrian improvements that are coming. What's happening out there can feel, like a car space and not a human space, I think is a good observation by both of them.
Yeah.
I did also, as Gary was talking, I was looking more closely at the map and thinking about, that kind of to and from work. And you do see, I guess when I look at like Naismith, between Naismith and East Hills, there's a lot more boardings and alightings in each direction between that stretch, and just maybe signifies kind of what Gary was alluding to, people going to and from home to work, and there's some grocery along there too. I mean, people might be chaining their trips to go to different places, but see stronger alignment.
Yeah.
East of Naismith.
Another thing to consider is the convenience of connections, because this route does serve a lot of great destinations, but some people may have to transfer to get to this route to reach those destinations, and transferring out in the field, so to speak, along 23rd Street or somewhere else, even along Iowa Street, just may not be very appealing to folks. So that's sometimes the argument for routing as many routes as possible through hubs, downtown, KU, the future Bob Billings hub, because it just makes for a more pleasant transfer experience. Okay.
And, Carol put in the chat, just following up on Gary's comment, what destinations do residents need for work? Boris, you want to speak to that?
What destinations do residents need for work? Is that what she said?
Yeah, what destinations do residents need for work? Okay.
Well, the office park out here is pretty is a destination-rich environment as far as work destinations go. KU obviously is the big elephant in your community. A lot of people work there, downtown as well. So we have a map. This map is showing a combination of employment and residential density. I have another map that I don't have it up right now, but it's just showing employment density. So that's one of the factors that we look at as we're trying to figure out which areas should need to be connected by transit. So hopefully that maybe
This is Carol Bowen. What I was wondering, like in North Lawrence, where we have very little ridership with a lot of potential, where do those folks need to go? They need to go to the grocery store. They need to go to work. How are they getting there?
Yep. Okay, that's a great question. So one way that we can answer that is looking at the travel demand model. So which is here. The travel demand model tells us where the most prevalent connections are, and we actually filtered this out to only show the highest ridership trip pairs. So actually from North Lawrence, there isn't anything that reaches the threshold of being a very heavy single connection. It's a little bit, I don't want to say that that there's not a lot of trips from North Lawrence to other places. There are, but they're diffused. So in other words, there's not kind of that critical mass of everyone from North Lawrence is going to any one place, because that's what these yellow, orange, and red lines are showing. They're showing the travel patterns that have that critical mass of activity that you could say, okay, now there's enough people making that trip that we should consider a transit connection. North Lawrence doesn't have anything of that level. Okay. Carol, does that help at all?
We've got the data, but if we want to get them on the bus, we have to figure out where they need to go.
Sure. Yeah. And so when you don't know where a person is going, the safest bet is to connect them to a place where they can make countless transfer opportunities. So connecting North Lawrence to downtown or some other major hub opens up the world to them, right? So it allows them to transfer to anywhere else within the service area. And that's kind of the priority. So whether that is a fixed route connection or a demand response connection, that's something that is kind of top on our priority list. All right, let's move on to Route 6. Okay, so Route 6 is a route that provides an important link to Northwest Lawrence from downtown. And when I say Northwest Lawrence, there's a few key destinations out there. You have the Rock Chalk Park, and then now you also have the medical camp. I guess it's the LHM. It's called LHM West or something like
LMH
that.
West.
LMH West. Yep, LMH West. We didn't have ridership data for the hospital because it wasn't open yet when we, in the ridership data that we collected. So I'm curious, Adam, are you seeing a lot of ridership out there at the hospital?
I think we're seeing comparable numbers to what we saw at Rock Chalk. So not real high. I think that it's been running just about a year. So I think in a change like that, you slowly gain ridership from people who realize, oh yeah, I can take this to work.
Sure.
So we'll have to see how that develops.
Okay. So it's a pretty direct alignment with easy to remember schedules. There are multiple transfer opportunities that this route provides downtown. So those are all great things about it. Some of the weaknesses are that there's low ridership west of Wakarusa, although that might have changed now with the hospital. I'm not sure. Also, there's west of Wakarusa. There's also the stops are not very frequently spaced, and that's kind of a push and pull argument. Also, if you space stops too frequently, then it can slow down service. But if they're spaced too far apart, then people may not have convenient access to some of their destinations. Another weakness is the one-way service along Overland Drive and 6th Street. So that's over here by Free State High School. Let me just zoom in there. So hopefully I have the direction right, but I believe that it travels along 6th in the eastbound direction. And then in the westbound direction, it travels along Overland, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay. And so the issue there is, like, for example, if someone is going to the high school, they have a pretty convenient trip. If they're coming from downtown or from points east, they have a pretty convenient trip to school, but then they have to walk a further distance to catch the bus going home. It's not terrible, but it isn't best practice. So we called that out. Opportunities for this service. Before the hospital got built, there may be an argument to be made, given the ridership out here, that maybe the route doesn't need to extend as far west as it does, because the ridership kind of is concentrated at Wakarusa and east. So you could potentially truncate the route. This is, I believe, Walmart, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, that's Walmart. So you could end the route here instead of continuing all the way out to Rock Chalk. That's probably not going to be our recommendation, though, because of the hospital. So, but we had that originally. Also, you could shift the Rock Chalk Park service to another route that has direct access to KU, which this route lacks. We understand that Rock Chalk is used both as a kind of a rec center and sports facilities by the city, or the residents of the city overall, as well as by KU affiliates. So right now, there's not a super convenient way to get to Rock Chalk from KU. So that's an opportunity. Adding a few more stops west of Wakarusa to increase accessibility is an option. And then also finding a single alignment to operate on through here by the high school. So those are some of the ideas we came up with so far. Any other thoughts?
The only thing I want to throw in is that 5401 Rock Chalk is the largest apartment complex in town. There's also one on George Williams Way that's one of the third largest. Also, can the 9 route service Rock Chalk, since it does go to 6 and Wakarusa and has the time, or just to remove it from the 6? That's the only thing I had.
Yep, I think that was one of the ideas that we had for 9. So we'll talk about that when we get to the 9. But yes.
This is not to be a naysayer about the hospital in any way, shape, or form. I think it does. It probably demands a second look, but it's an outpatient facility, and so I mean, which is not to say that there aren't quite a few employees there, but I'm guessing that the employment is probably more like, a large facility with multiple doctors' offices rather than having staff on inpatient floors and whatnot. So I assume that the employment, the number of individuals employed there is probably substantially less than at the hospital itself, and probably, far fewer visits and whatnot. So I'm not saying that it's not worth looking at, but I just caution against thinking of it as a hospital. It's more of a outpatient services center. So I have no idea how many people are employed there. But
I also believe it specializes in cancer treatment, if I'm correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Outpatient services.
And this could be another opportunity or use case for a demand response service. So if, for example, the fixed route service were to terminate here at the Walmart, that could be a jumping off point for a large on-demand zone that serves some of these very suburban land use neighborhoods that might be more, that sort of service is more conducive for auto-oriented environments like suburban land use.
Hey, Boris, this is Quiz again. And so what is the travel time on this route?
So you mean how long does it take to get from downtown out to Rock Chalk?
From one end to the other.
Okay. I actually don't have the
That's
schedule.
actually about 20-25 minutes, depending on which direction you're going.
And thanks, Margaret. And I was just curious, the comment about the really big apartment complex that's out there, yet we don't see high ridership. And I'm just trying to figure out at what point are folks saying the route is too long for me to consider taking the bus, you know,
Mhm.
I don't know what that is. And I thought we would see higher numbers out here with the big apartment complex, but
Yeah, it's a really good question. So these types of apartments in Lawrence, are you seeing a lot of students living out there, or?
No,
They are.
this is Gary. This is the links, isn't it? Isn't that what we're talking about
It
here
is.
north of the?
Right.
Okay, the
it-
links is kind of a high end. Have your little apartment around a golf course. It's high end apartments. It's maybe some students live out there, but I would say most of the students live on the 23rd Street apartments that are,
gotcha.
that'll allow for numerous students in one apartment, and they're total different payment schedule and how they're arranged. The links is high end stuff, and I don't think you're going to get a lot of bus people coming out of there.
Sure.
I
Can
will
I
say anecdotally that we do get calls about it each year because people have chosen to move in there and then realize later that they are not on a bus route because that's almost a mile from the closest stop. And at Hilly, people are not going to walk to a bus stop there.
Mhm.
That's what I wanted to add, was the fact that the distance to the bus stops there on Overland are pretty significant.
I think this is a prime example of a good application of on-demand service, because the people who live out here can afford the little bit more it costs for on-demand service, and it takes away the need for them to worry about having to walk. I'm sure there's lots of elderly folks who are retiring at the links who are not going to walk a half a mile to a bus stop, but they'd like to use the bus. So I would advocate a possibility of on-demand for this neighborhood, for this entire region.
Yeah.
And this is Chris. I guess I'd also throw out, if as Queens Road is redeveloped, would Queens to, I don't know what the extension of Wakarusa to the west is called. I don't know if that becomes Rock Chalk Drive. Yeah, from there, if you go onto the west, that's a through road that goes right through the Lynx complex.
Mhm.
That's
And,
Overland.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh
Overland.
no, so
to the
this
south.
is Overland. This is
Right,
Overland is
so-
here. This is, I think, Wakarusa or Rock Chalk. I'm not sure what it's called here.
Yeah,
Probably
I'm not
both.
sure. Whatever it's called there, I think it may be called Rock Chalk Drive west of Queens, but Queens is, as it is redeveloped here in the next couple of years, I guess one option would also be to pick up that complex more directly by
Yeah.
going north to Rock Chalk Drive.
Yeah.
possibly.
So I think to kind of piggyback on something that Gary said, one additional benefit of a demand response service in a case like this, where you're seeing a lot of development, is that it not only is a good fit for the land use you're seeing out there because it's more auto oriented, but also it's a good gauge of demand itself. Like it's sort of like a probe. You put it out there and you see where the ridership materializes. You can then follow that up in a year or two with a fixed route that you connect the dots of where you're seeing the ridership. So that's another argument for a more demand responsive approach out here.
Carol Bowen speaking. I
Carol.
was looking at it from the destination perspective. The recreation center is supposed to service the entire city, but it's very difficult to get to from the southeast side. The high school also has, I would say, a lot of need for transportation. They may not be using it yet. Is there any way that we could do some kind of targeted scheduling, strategic scheduling that would service those two activity centers, I guess?
You mean the high school and the rec
Holcomb,
center?
or whatever the parks
Yeah.
name.
So I guess I'd have to ask what you mean by targeted schedule, because there are certain regulations, and Adam could probably speak to this pretty well, that do not allow for service to be designed as a kind of like a charter service to specifically serve like a high school, for example. If you have a service that is open to the general public and it happens to go by a high school, that's all fair game. But if you're targeting your ridership, or if you're targeting the design of your service just around a high school, then that gets into there are some regulatory issues there.
Right, but we don't know about the hospital yet because it's too new. And there are some other medical offices out there. I was just thinking, you have a high ridership at certain times and low ridership at other times, if you could plan that into a schedule.
Oh, sure. So that's a good point, because right now the route operates at 30 minutes all day. You could make the case that maybe it should operate more frequently during peak periods, when school is getting out or kids are coming to school, maybe even every 20 minutes, and then hourly during other parts of the day when there's just not a lot of activity in that part of town. That's certainly something that could be recommended, having a variable schedule like that. Okay. All right. We'll go on to Route 7 then, if that's okay. Okay. All right, so Route 7, which is here. Okay, so Route 7 is another route that serves this South Iowa corridor, which, as we mentioned earlier, is a very destination-rich environment. It also serves the other high school, the Lawrence High School campus up here. It has strong ridership on several trips. Actually, as was just mentioned, those trips happen to be when school is getting in and out. So that's what we're seeing on Route 7. It has pretty frequent service. It currently operates 30 minutes all day, and then strong on-time performance. So the weaknesses of Route 7 are that it doesn't have Sunday service, which is a weakness on a lot of routes. Inconsistent alignment, which, as I understand, has actually now been changed. So previously, buses would operate along Louisiana Street in one direction, Kentucky Street in the other, but I believe that now all the buses operate on Louisiana coming and going. So this is actually a little bit inaccurate. And then it also has low ridership west of Iowa Street. So that's these neighborhoods over here, where we are seeing quite a drop off in ridership out here. So few opportunities. One is to operate with more of a nuanced schedule, the 30-60 or 20-60 potentially, to improve productivity and lower frequency during unproductive times. Adding Sunday service would probably be recommended for this route, given the fairly high ridership the route's seeing on Saturday. Operating, as I mentioned, consistent alignment, that's already happened. And then replacing service west of Iowa with a demand response model due to the low ridership here. Another idea is considering shifting service from Massachusetts Street to Haskell Avenue in order to balance the destination-rich environment that you see on the south end of the route with more residential. So it's currently operating on Massachusetts, but we mentioned earlier that Haskell has a pretty high concentration of multifamily housing. So if this route were extended to Haskell instead of Massachusetts, then the folks that are along this corridor would have access to all the retail on the South Iowa corridor. Any thoughts on that one?
So that route is kind of known as the Walmart route. So how would Route 6 riders get to Walmart on South Iowa?
You mean Route 7 or Route 6?
Well, I'm just saying transfer from 6. Like 7 is known as the Walmart route because it goes straight by Walmart from downtown. So most people take the 7. If you're taking the 7, the 4, or 7 or 4, how do you get to Walmart? I'm sorry, the 6 or the 4, how do you get to Walmart?
Okay, so well, the 6, serves a different Walmart, first of all. So you do have access to that Walmart. If you're trying to get to the South Iowa Walmart, then you could transfer downtown. I wasn't suggesting not operating on Massachusetts downtown. I was suggesting routing through Haskell and then coming back to downtown.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, I'm still unclear on that. So you wouldn't be going both ways on Mass Street? Is that what you're saying?
No. So you would shift service to Haskell for this particular route. Other routes would still serve Massachusetts, this segment of Massachusetts Street, but this particular route, because it is such a destination-rich environment on its south end, we would want to balance that with an area that has a lot of residential. So Massachusetts has less multifamily housing. It has multifamily housing, but less of it than Haskell Avenue. So you could connect the retail and other destinations on the south end of the route with residential on the north end by operating along Haskell and then maybe 11th into downtown.
Where's South Park in the map?
South Park?
Yeah.
It's right by 11th there, Boris, just south of 11th Street.
I can't see the print.
It's coming.
Okay, so right now, the bus goes both ways, and you're saying it would not go both ways there?
So one idea would be to take service on Route 7 and shift it to Haskell Street. So it would not operate at all on Massachusetts south of 11th Street. That's not to say there would be no service on Massachusetts Street. There would be other routes that could provide that coverage. But because this particular route has so much retail on the south end, we would want to link it to an area with a lot of residential to balance it out.
Okay, so, and this is a very personal question. I apologize for this, but on Louisiana Street, my grandson picks up Route 7 and takes it to a parochial school just on the west side of South Park. And he gets off and on Mass Street, right by South Park.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be gone.
Well, so under the scenario that I just laid out, which is only an idea at this point, buses coming up Haskell would, they'd go right by South Park on their way into downtown. So they would go up Haskell and then 11th Street and then turn north on one of the north-south streets to go into downtown. So if the school that you're referring to, is it this school here, maybe? No, it's not it, sorry.
It's west of the
St. John's.
Yes.
Okay, right here. Yep. So under that scenario, he may have to walk through the park. If there was a stop on 11th Street, somewhere near Massachusetts, he'd have to walk through the park to get to the school.
Okay.
This is all very theoretical at this point. This isn't, it's just brainstorming ideas, but that's how it could work.
Yeah, this is Gary Weber. I can see the attractiveness of the Haskell move to get it near residences, since it's the South Iowa is a retail destination. But when I'm looking on the ridership by stop map on the route, there's a huge amount of boarding and disembarking on Massachusetts Street, and I think we might, it might be a trade-off or even a loss if we move to Haskell. I like the idea, but I think it's, since so much of the ridership is picking up this bus on Massachusetts, I can't imagine shifting it away from all those folks.
Right, and we talked about, for example, I think Route 5. Let's just quickly revisit that. One of the ideas on Route 5 was to shift it to Massachusetts. Oops, hold on. My mouse got away from me. 1 second. All right, Route 5. Okay, so we talked about the idea of maybe operating service on Route 5 along the Massachusetts corridor. So there's no scenario where Massachusetts would not have service. So the question is just what is the proper connection opportunity from Massachusetts? Like where do we anchor the service that operates along Massachusetts? So there's a lot of different ideas that we could throw out, and we will throw out different ideas in the two different scenarios that we're putting together. But there would be no scenario where Massachusetts does not have service.
This is Chris. I think the potential move to Haskell, I think, makes some sense in relation to the discontinuing the service to the west side. That seems like like potentially a good trade-off.
I would say on that west side, like through the Holcomb neighborhood, we did, I guess 2 years ago, proposed changes out that way. There's a challenging left turn from Lawrence Avenue on the 31st Street out on the south end of the route. There's no signal and can sometimes contribute to on-time performance challenges. When we looked at like taking service off of Lawrence and just taking it north-south along Iowa instead, I know we heard a lot from residents in that neighborhood who use the east-west connection to get their kids to Lawrence High and some of the other schools along the route. So just as background, I know we've heard before from that Lawrence Avenue Holcomb neighborhood about they like that east-west connection over to like Billy Mills Middle School and Lawrence High.
The Central Middle School is the big one there too.
But it's by let's see, Central Middle School is where?
1500 Mass.
Okay, yep, so it's over here.
Or 1400 Mass.
Okay.
And Billy Mills is right at 27th in Louisiana. So kind of a straight east-west shot from that neighborhood.
Yep.
This is Gary Weber. I know we need to move on, but this is one of the highest ridership routes in the city. I have trouble tweaking it. It works.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's status quo is also always an option. Our role here is pointing out strengths and weaknesses. So the one weakness we did see was out here, Lawrence Avenue, the ridership was pretty low. But overall, you're absolutely right. It's a pretty strong route. Okay. Let's move on to Route 9. Okay. So Route 9, speaking of west of Iowa, we'll talk about Route 9. So Route 9 provides crosstown service between Northwest Lawrence and South Lawrence. It does provide access to a couple of really important destinations, the Social Security Administration and the VA, which are both located right here or in this area along Wakarusa. It does have a pretty easy to remember clock face frequency. It's operating every 60 minutes. It provides weekday and Saturday service, and it has good on-time performance. The weakness is, first of all, in its ridership. So it averages 2.8 riders a trip on weekdays. Actually has higher ridership on weekends, 4.9, probably because of the retail connections on South Iowa. Has low ridership at most stops other than the route termini. So if we look at the ridership map, it has its strongest ridership is kind of at the ends of the route. Some of this ridership is actually associated with other routes where you have multiple routes serving the same stop. So it kind of looks like there's more ridership than there really is. But if you look on your packet, if you printed that out or have that in front of you, you'll notice that the highest ridership is really at the end of the line, the two ends of the line for this route. The other weaknesses, there's actually an inconsistent alignment through here. It's not shown on this map, but I believe that you have service on Clinton Parkway now, Is that correct, Adam? It operates along Clinton Parkway?
We do, yeah. So because there was a KDOT road pattern change down in the lower left of 23rd and, where 27th and Wakarusa kind of curve into each other, that forces one direction travel there. We can only travel that whole loop in clockwise fashion. So
okay,
we do travel, like we can't travel south on Clinton or on Wakarusa past Clinton Parkway, or else that road forces us out on the highway.
And Adam, didn't we discuss this once about the ridership needs for the east-west 24th Street stops? I just vaguely remember us discussing this in the past.
Yeah, we streamlined on West 24th Street. We aligned routes 9 and 29 together. So there's bi-directional service there.
Okay.
All the apartments there. But that 27 Wakarusa Inverness loop is currently a challenge due to road pattern changes. It might change with some Wakarusa South Lawrence Traffic Way interchange work. Right. There's some potential for better options for movements for us, but right now we're pretty limited.
Right. And you mentioned Route 29. So one of the things we noted is that the Route 9 does have some redundancy with both Route 10. There's a typo in the package. It says Route 19 and 29. It should be 10 and 29. So you can see Route 10 up here has some redundancy with 9, and then Route 29 on the south side also has some redundancy. So there's that. So opportunities for this route. The other one other weakness is that it's not anchored at a major transfer hub, so not KU or downtown. So opportunities, if possible in the future, operate along a consistent alignment here. Again, reduce some of the redundancy with other routes, potentially by linking this route with the Bob Billings Transit or Transfer Center. So potentially, serving from Castled, or is it Castled or Caseled? Castled. Continuing north on Castled to the Transfer Center. That could be an option. And then also just, again, replacing some of this service with demand response, just because it is a very suburban built environment, and demand response service may operate a little bit more effectively in that kind of environment. I believe, so this also could be extended to Rock Chalk. So that's another idea. Or if it is extended to Rock Chalk, this alignment from Rock Chalk could potentially go down Bob Billings into KU. So there's a few different options, but right now it's not a strong performer. So
this is Gary Weber. This route impressed me as the least performing route pretty much on the whole scale. And given the redundancy and its low performance, I think this is, if we weren't seriously consider removing a route, this would be the one that I would look at most seriously.
Yeah, you're right that on many metrics it's the worst performing of the Lawrence Transit routes. Okay, any other thoughts on that one?
I guess I'd just say in general, this is kind of one of those routes that highlights, our attempts historically at coverage, right? We want to have service across our city, but not, fixed route has been our main tool in the tool belt, I guess. So it's interesting to me to have some other tools we can look at to still get service out here when we've had fixed route trying to be the one that solves it for a long time, and maybe it's not the best fit.
Yep, great point. Okay, Route 10. Try to speed it up a little bit. So this is just generally a pretty strong route. It has strong ridership and productivity on weekdays. It does have two really strong anchors, so KU and downtown. That's great. Relatively frequent service and easy to remember clock face frequency. So it operates 30 minutes throughout the service day. The weaknesses of this route are relatively low Saturday ridership. And then the route also ends short of Rock Chalk Park. So it actually, does connect downtown to KU, it could also connect both of those to Rock Chalk Park. We mentioned earlier that that's a destination where we probably would see ridership from both hubs. Another weakness is that you have low ridership at most stops west of Castled. I'll turn on ridership real quick. I'm sorry, I turned it on and off. Yeah, so ridership is pretty strong up to here, and then it is fairly weak as you head further west along Bob Billings. Also, it has a fairly large one-way loop through downtown Lawrence. So that is something that maybe could be addressed through a more consistent alignment through downtown. Right now, it just kind of does a very large loop. So the opportunities are, first of all, what I just mentioned, that more consistent service through downtown. Extending the route to Rock Chalk Park could be considered. Reducing the Saturday service frequency, or potentially even replacing the route on Saturdays with demand response service. So those are a few ideas. Any other thoughts or comments on that one?
I don't know how far apart the houses and whatnot are, but what would happen if we just had straight line service on 6th Street and all the east-west streets on the main streets?
So when you say straight line service on 6th, so 6th Street is kind of the end of the line here. This is 6th right here. So it is a pretty direct service. So most of the service is on Bob Billings Parkway, and it does stay on Bob Billings, and it comes up Wakarusa. It does an end of the line loop. I'm trying to remember if it's clockwise or counterclockwise, but it essentially ends around 6th Street.
Yes, I do want to build on Carol's comment, though. I think that kind of corridor type service where it's just kind of obvious where routes operate because they operate along straight corridors is intriguing. It's all about figuring out where the endpoints of those are, I think. Do you like let's say on those east-west corridors, do you ask everyone to do kind of unique transfers at Wakarusa, or do you take them all to one place like this area near Walmart? I think that's kind of where some of the questions lie with corridor level thinking.
Yeah, there are many examples of cities that have kind of a grid style approach to transit service. So Chicago is one of the maybe biggest examples of that, and they stay on the major corridors. And the trick to that, though, is you can make that work if you have high frequency on most of your routes all the time, because if you have high frequency, you can keep every route on just right on the main corridors. You don't have to worry about trying to sync up the schedules, because no matter when you get off the bus, there'll be another one coming along fairly soon. So if you have 15-minute frequency on every corridor, then you can get away with doing kind of this grid style corridor network. So some of the routes in Lawrence are operating every hour, and so that doesn't blend itself to that kind of service, but it's possible we could somehow make it work if we eliminated service where it's not performing strongly, and reinvest in higher frequency along the key corridors, and then maybe fill any gaps with like demand response service as a kind of a safety net. So there's always that possibility. In fact, maybe that's what one of our scenarios will look like. One will lean a little bit more heavily toward demand response service, and another one will try to expand coverage on fixed route a bit more. Okay. Next, we will look at 15. We're going to skip 11. 11 is a coordinated route, so we're going to skip that today.
One more thing on Route 10, Boris. I guess I see a lot of opportunity here with a portion of this route having high frequency, particularly between the new hub location, campus, and downtown. If there is, some trips of this route could run the full length, but if there's high frequency on that, like connecting our two major hubs with KU in between, I could see a lot of value in that. And there's also, if you could briefly turn on Route 30, which is a KU route, which operates along some consistent alignment.
Make it more visible, 1 second.
And that particular route picks up quite a bit of riders from the KU side and runs close. So I think there's just some opportunity there, whether it's between higher frequency between the new hub, KU downtown, or Castle new hub, KU downtown. I think we should look closely at if there can be a more high frequency.
I agree. The next area where I thought we could do coordination on a route. And so using those resources that way might be a really excellent opportunity for everyone.
Yep, good thoughts. There's a few different ways you can achieve that higher frequency service in part of a route. You can either have what's called a short turn. So that's similar to actually what's happening a little bit now with the 30 and the 10 sharing part of their alignment. One is shorter than the other. It's called a short turn because it turns back. Another way to do that would be something like if, let's say, the Route 9 came up Castled and then went east to the new Bob Billings facility, and then continued into KU and downtown. So you essentially overlay two routes and you offset their schedules so that in effect, where they have a common alignment, you can achieve 15-minute service frequency if each of them is operating every 30 minutes. So there's a few different ways you can do that. Okay.
I do want to elevate a comment from the chat that JT put in there that just asks about recognition or consideration about people using the bus and bicycle together and measuring the potential of that. So I know as we start building scenarios, that'll be important to think about the bike network as well. So I'll read the comment here. So a recognition being given to the transportation choice of bus and bike. Any attempts made in survey to measure current/potential began to use the bus only to, for example, traverse 23 or maybe 23rd Street without having to bike it. Occasionally the two bike racks on a bus are filled.
Yeah, it's a great point because you can, in a transit network, you can only go so far on the bus, but if you have a bike with you, you can extend even further, and vice versa. Most people only go so far on a bike, but if they have access to a bike rack, they can go even further on the bus. So joining the two is a mutually beneficial kind of relationship for both modes. It's not all. I think, to be fair though, there's a lot of transit riders. Some transit riders will use bikes as their first and last mile connector, but many will not. If you're traveling with children, if you're traveling with groceries and so on, there's kind of that factor, the convenience factor of can you really continue on your trip on a bike? So that's something that we also have to keep in mind as we talk about different modes of travel. All right, but I'm all for improving bike amenities and bike infrastructure in general. All right, let's talk about 15. Okay, so 15 provides a really important connection. It does link downtown to the Peaslee Technical Training Center, which is over here. It does have an easy to remember clock face frequency, and it provides service on weekdays and Saturdays, but it's a pretty circuitous route. So somebody downtown going to the office park has to deviate through Peaslee, and vice versa. Going home, they may have to go through there to go back downtown. So that's a bit of a weakness. The weak transit potential along Barker Avenue is another weakness. We just have not seen strong ridership along that corridor. There's not a lot of multifamily housing to necessarily generate ridership, and the stops that we are seeing there are fairly weak. So some of them are not used at all. So that's something to consider. And then very low ridership on Saturdays, and generally low ridership overall with fewer than 5 passengers per trip on most weekday and Saturday trips. So the average is three passengers a trip on weekdays, 1.4 on Saturdays. So some ideas for this service that we could consider. One would be streamlining, oops, sorry about that. Streamlining the route so that it deviates, so basically cutting out the deviation to the technical training school. Of course, that's an important destination. So if we were to eliminate that deviation, we would need to find some other way to serve this. So again, maybe demand response is an option. Maybe you replace service south of 23rd Street overall with demand response service, and then maybe modify the route to serve a stronger corridor than Barker, maybe Massachusetts. So potentially that could be another route that operates on Massachusetts, and maybe eliminate Saturday service due to low ridership. So those are some preliminary ideas.
This is August Rudisell. I don't see the need for a 15 go to East Hills Business Park, but the South Haskell location has 3 primary locations. The Boys and Girls Club is there, as well as the Kansas Department of Labor Workforce Center is there. And like you said, the Peaslee Education Center is there as well.
Okay. Great to know. Okay, any other thoughts about that? And then we have one more left. So I know everybody's probably had enough of me talking, but we have one more to go. All right, let's do the last one. And then any last questions we can get after that.
Just real quickly, Boris, before you leave 15, I think it's critical that we provide for those things that August just mentioned. This might be an opportunity to, it seems redundant to go to the East Hill Business Park from here. So perhaps we could just terminate it at Peaslee and then head back up north again. Or some, if you need additional space, serve that neighborhood that's south of 24th a little bit better instead of going to the East Hill Business Park.
I was wondering if the East Hills Business Park was ever used by Peaslee. Do they have students going back and forth?
I'm not sure. The Peaslee stop in general is not heavily used. So 2.7 boardings, about 1 alighting a day. So for whatever reason, it may be because I don't know, maybe it's a bit too circuitous of a route. I'm not sure why, but for some reason it hasn't attracted strong ridership.
I think in 2019, all that entire location was pretty new, especially the Boys and Girls Club. I had just moved there, and Peaslee Tech was only a year or less old, maybe 2 years old.
Okay, yeah, that would help explain it. All right, let's look at Route 27. So Route 27 provides the pretty important link between KU and the Haskell campus. And it also connects both campuses to this fairly dense concentration of housing and retail that's kind of south of 23rd Street, between Louisiana. Let's see, I believe this is Louisiana Street, isn't it? Is that Louisiana?
Yeah.
Louisiana and Alabama.
Yep, between Louisiana and Alabama, south of 23rd Street. So the weaknesses are that you have the lowest total ridership among Lawrence transit routes. You also have relatively little ridership activity on the Haskell campus. And then infrequent and non-clock face frequency because it operates every 40 minutes. So that's, both infrequent and not clock face. And it only operates during the school semester, during the long semesters. So it potentially, with the route kind of disappearing during the rest of the year. It may create a bit of a disruption for any other riders from these neighborhoods that are not associated with the schools. So some of the ideas for improving the service, we could consider shortening the route to allow for clock-based frequency. So rather than having it operate as a 40-minute route, maybe it operates as a 30-minute route. Different ways to shorten it could be either cutting out Haskell or maybe streamlining service and cutting out, the circulation along Louisiana and Alabama. You could also potentially extend the route further to create a 60-minute service or interline it with something to create a 60-minute service rather than 40. 40 is just like a really awkward frequency. It's like neither here nor there. And you could also replace the route with demand response service that operates year round rather than just a school calendar focused fixed route service. So any thoughts on any of those ideas?
I'm wondering why you would include Haskell and that residential area on 23rd Street on the same route.
I'm guessing that it has to do with the fact that this area has apartments that are pretty popular with students. And so folks who live here in this neighborhood probably are as likely to attend one college as the other, or maybe more likely to attend KU because it's bigger, but just in general, the students are probably attracted to this neighborhood from both campuses.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Haskell students live on campus for the most part.
Okay.
I actually know the answer to this question. The city added this route when KU changed a route to start the coordinated route 29, and the ridership was low enough that having the service that we had that was quite a bit more frequent than every 40 minutes, it was low enough that wasn't necessary. And so we moved our service to the coordinated route, and the city started this route to catch people who still needed bus service, but didn't need it to be as high frequency as other KU routes.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't this supposed to alleviate the number 5 going through the Hainu loop?
No, that wasn't really the intention. It was to connect. It was to connect Haskell to KU for the students who were doing the program crossover, and make it so that they didn't have to travel a long distance and then transfer in order to get to KU campus.
And when that was done, after that, Haskell changed its programs and it had more 4-year programs, and the students were not going to take very many KU classes. Somebody needs to ask the school if they're sending students up to KU anymore. I mean, Haskell students need transportation, but do they need it to KU?
Okay.
You know that came up. Yeah, I mean, I do know that came up in conversation with these students who are a part of the steering committee. Haven't had a chance to join us as much, but I know in early conversations with them, they spoke strongly about that connection and the importance of students who do that program. That includes classes at both campuses. So I do think it's something we want to continue to consider, whether it's this alignment or some other alignment. How do people get between Haskell and KU? I think it's something we need to maintain in some form.
Okay. So that I think covers all 10 routes that we were planning to cover today. Next time we meet in a month, we're going to talk about the university routes. So I think we got a lot of really good feedback. We've been taking notes, and we'll incorporate some of the feedback that we've heard tonight in our scenarios. But yeah, I think that's really all I have on the agenda, unless anybody else has any comments or questions.
Boris, getting back to the corridor idea,
Mm-hmm.
The east-west streets are the ones that connect our more suburban-like neighborhoods with our core neighborhoods. And it just seems like there are only like 3 streets, 6th Street, maybe 9th Street, 23rd Street, that go clear across, that we ought to be able to take advantage of that somehow.
Yeah, that is something that we could try to incorporate into one of our scenarios. Again, I just would say that we've seen from experience on 23rd Street as just one example, we haven't seen strong ridership along this corridor when the route is not anchored at a key hub. So the corridors themselves, while they do have some important destinations along them, they have retail along them, they have residential along them. In many cases, it's the kind of approach to those corridors that is a challenge. It's not the pedestrian environment isn't great in some cases. Yes, it's improving, but the services that seem to do best are those that are linked to key hubs like KU and downtown. So we can't ignore that fact. So it's something. Maybe there's a way we can kind of balance where we have service along these main, like Clinton Parkway or 23rd Street up until Iowa, and then that then from there we head toward a hub like KU and sort of have a fork in the road sort of design. But as far as like a pure grid where buses are running just along the east-west corridors and just the north-south corridors, I think that'll be harder. I think it'll be harder to generate strong ridership under that model, but we can always take a look.
Of course, I will just, JT put another comment in the chat and asked me to read it so you can hear it if you're not able to access the chat. So he says, no recognition being given to the intersection of bus routes and the loop. So when he says the loop, he means the Lawrence Loop, which is a recreational bicycle and pedestrian trail that encircles the city that is about 85% done, I believe.
Okay.
Those are only recreational cyclists who are apt to drive to, for example, the youth sports complex to put a bike onto the loop. So biking from the county, for example, Eudora, DeSoto, KC, East Hills bus stop is a means of avoiding the urban bike ride to downtown.
Okay.
This combo making working in Johnson County and biking in it. So that is, I mean, I think that's worth thinking about, just how we interact with some of those recreational areas that tend to be on the edges to a certain extent.
Yep. Good comment. Anything else in the chat?
Don't believe so.
Okay. So it's 7:30 or almost 7:35. So thank you all. This was our first opportunity to take full advantage of our longer meeting format. So I guess it was worth it this time, and it may be again at our next meeting. Hopefully they won't all go 2 hours, but you never know. So,
Hey, Boris, this is Quiz. Could whoever set the meetings up, the invites, could you guys adjust those to 2 hours so they reflect that on schedules? It would just help me organizationally wise.
Yep, I'll do it, Quiz. I didn't get that done before this meeting, but I'll make that change.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all and have a good evening.
Thanks, Boris.
All right. Bye.